Welcome to another episode of Tank Talks, your personal think tank for all things startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner of Ripple Ventures. On today's show, we are talking about the future of PetTech with the founder and CEO of Pawp, Marc Atiyeh. The pet care industry is a $100 billion market opportunity in the US alone today, with about 2/3 of the US households owning a pet. It's also known to be quite recession-proof, as almost every pet owner views their pets as family members, as I sure do as a pet owner myself. But only recently have consumers started spending more on their pets' health and well-being than they sometimes do on themselves. On today's show, we asked Marc how the pet tech industry started out with more hardware and dog walking startups, but only recently transitioned to more health tech focused startups entering the market today. We dig into the effects the pandemic has had on pet adoption and ownership, and how Pawp is trying to help pet owners take back control of their pets' data while making taking care of your pets more affordable. Lastly, we talked to Marc about how they raised a $13 million Series A from Lux Capital and Hoff Capital, traditionally more deep tech and hard tech focused investors, and what their growth plans are for the future. Now let's get into this week's episode with Marc Atiyeh, founder and CEO of Pawp. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Marc.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Matt.
So as I mentioned, today I wanted to talk about the future of pet tech and all the ways companies like Pawp are helping bring our furry friends into the future. This is a special topic for me as my wife and I have our own furry friend, Jones, our 3.5-year-old golden retriever. And when Jones was 6 months old, he broke his leg, which was an unfortunate event, but lucky for us, we had pet insurance. However, telemedicine wasn't really an option as he needed serious surgery and physical therapy for a year. So I was thrown headfirst into the inefficiencies of the pet healthcare industry. But enough about me complaining. I'd love to kick things off with what pet tech means to you and how the industry has developed over the last several years, in your opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, pet tech is pretty much the introduction, or at least the fact that the pet industry started leveraging technology for the betterment of pet care and for the betterment of pet parents. The idea that technology can help facilitate and provide quality pet care is obviously important. One of the areas that we've seen a lot of improvement in is in telehealth. The ability and the fact that you can press a button and talk to a professional pet care or a veterinarian has not or was not in existence a few years ago. So essentially, it's the idea that we are seeing within the pet care, we're seeing all the progress in the human healthcare and adapting or essentially bringing on some of the technology that we're seeing has been successful in human health in terms of at-home tests, telehealth, the idea and the fact that data can suggest and can be a preemptive indicator into like whether your dog or your cat is getting into some sort of ailment. Everything we're seeing in the human space is just very naturally translating into the pet space, and that's what makes it extremely exciting.
Yeah, and I think we all could agree that we take better care of our pets than we do take care of our own bodies sometimes. I always say to my wife, I want to come back in my next life as a golden retriever.
I agree with you on that one. I use the same one. I just say Yorkie just because our dog's a Yorkie, but exactly the same one. And I'm newly married, so that's been happening more often than not.
Absolutely. I've read that the pet care industry is a $100 billion market opportunity in the US today alone. And with 85 million families, so about 67% of households owning a pet, it's also known to be recession resilient. And 99% of US pet owners view their pets as family members, as I said. So they're very less price sensitive. So given all the positive market trends in the industry, why has it historically been so slow to adopt technology?
The number one reason is, we've been elevating vets and vet clinics for the past decades within pet care. So the idea is it all starts with the vet clinics. Now, as you very well know, anything that's big, anything that's very heavy on red tape takes forever to kind of innovate. And the fact that all those big companies and big conglomerates, I don't want to name them because some of them were involved with Pawp, own some of those vet clinics. There's such a monopoly on how pet care has been kind of administered to pet parents, and therefore they just don't want to change their ways. Anything or anywhere, wherever you want to start in innovation, you don't want to start where the player or the incumbents are way too big, because they're obviously their willingness to change is you're going to be met with a lot of obstacles. So a lot of reticence for a veterinarian or at least those big conglomerates to make any changes. And then you see all of those newer, smaller, I would say, startups and companies getting funded. And that's where we're taking it heads on to the big players. And we're kind of obliging them or forcing them to make some changes. And those changes very, very often involve using technology, very often involve bringing more competition to the space, and therefore driving the price of pet care down to a certain extent. Obviously, we're not magicians. We can't overnight make $100 vaccine cost $10, but that's obviously what we're thriving for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my sister and her partner are both vet surgeons. One's a cardiologist, one's an internist, and they just had a transition to the telemedicine world as the cardiologist, and they're still waiting to get their monitors and their, desk setups properly structured at home for them to offer them telemedicine to their patients. And we're 18 months into a global pandemic. So they are very slow to adopt. However, we've also seen a lot of roll-up funds in the private equity space take a run at rolling up this vet clinics and vet hospital space, as you mentioned, especially in the US recently. However, the inefficiencies and synergies they often bring are more related to the financial and productivity side rather than the operational and software side. Why do you think that has been the case?
One of the things when we started Pawp, right? Like we personally came out of an acquisition. Me and my co-founder were very early on the founding team of a company called Clarity Money that sold to Goldman Sachs. So we came from the fintech space, and part of like what we wanted to do is to introduce technology to the space. When we started, our idea was we're gonna fetch the health certificate of a pet, like of a pet. The idea that today, like let's say you Matt have a, call it your dog, your golden retriever has a health certificate that lives in the hand of a veterinarian, and unfortunately, one, you don't have access to it, but more importantly, this health certificate for the most part is a mine gold of data, right? Like it has all sorts of touch points, when you came, how old obviously your pet is, those are the basics, but more importantly, whether your pet is allergic to certain things, whether your pet has had a history, like a cardiac history, has had skin rashes and whatnot, you name it. So the idea that this health certificate just sits in some sort of drawer in a vet clinic is just like super sad in 2021. The issue and what we have been met with when we started is vets just didn't want to share that data, and to which we obviously, one, that was very, very unfortunate. Same thing that we saw with fintech. 15 years ago, banks would be very reticent to share transaction data and income statements and bank statements and credit card statements. And now, truth be told, 15 years later, you have the Plaids of the world, the Symphonies of the world, you have the Yodlee of the words, like all of those big companies kind of accessing that information, and a bunch of like companies built on top of those, call it like credit card statements or whatnot. And this is what we really wanted to create in the pet space, the idea that we have access to this, we have access to a health certificate, and ultimately we can build a lot of applications and a lot of features and pretty much bring value to the end consumer. That didn't happen. And the next step, and what we tried to do is, what, let's try to build software for vet clinics. And what we have been met with, like, and you kind of alluded to it, Matt, is on average, a vet clinic spends $1,000 on software a year. For us being a tech company, trying to sell software to vet clinics, it's not feasible. No investor would touch us with a 10-foot pole. It's just not enough money. The demand is not quite there. So ultimately we landed where we landed, I would say, because of the pandemic. We made a big pivot, ended up like doing what we do. So again, it's one, I think the demand is there from the consumer. Unfortunately, the consumers haven't had a chance to know what kind of value they can get having access to that data. So that's something that I think we, and alongside other companies, have been hammering down, and kind of sharing with our consumers, like with our tens of thousands of consumers, and what other startups are doing. We're educating people as to, imagine you had the data in the palm of your hand. Here's what this would have meant to you. And therefore, we're seeing now consumers and pet parents going back to their clinics and demanding those things, whether it being the health certificates, whether it being like they want to be able to talk to their vet via video chat in the comfort of their couch. So we are, I would say, at the forefront of a new trend. And we're not the only ones to do it. There's plenty of I would say a handful of other startups in our space doing an equally good job at that. So it's gonna have to come from us, the startups. The onus is on us. We're lucky to be backed by VC and obviously investors that are putting money in the space. But then we educate the people, and then ultimately we hope that pet parents are going to demand more and more from their traditional vets. Let's call it this way.
That's interesting. So you tried to go at the vets to get them to open up their sort of data sets for you to get access to help support the customer, which the customer wanted. But do you think the vets were worried to open that up because of their maybe replacement value, or they were just not comfortable trusting somebody else with the data that they technically had, even though technically it should be the pet owner's data?
Good question. I wish I had a good argument, right? I wish, it makes so much sense. Like you're sitting here and you're saying, like, you, Matt, you're probably sitting being like, why did this not happen? There's probably another 20 things I can name, not just in the pet space. It's just like, there's no real reason why they're not being improved. But the reality is there are about 3 or 4 big companies that own what is called a PIMS, right? The Patient Information Manager software. And those companies, unfortunately, are so ingrained within vet clinics that they control that health certificate. And ultimately, they made it even harder and harder for us to have access to. So at best, what we would get is, believe it or not, in 2020, a fax being faxed to us, which is the health certificate. It would sometimes be handwritten. So imagine us like trying to OCR it, which is like try to like, introduce some software to try to make sense out of this like health certificate. So they don't make it easy in terms of the vets. The PIMS also like make it even harder for anything to be shared externally. And the idea is they want to sell vet clinics on things or cross sell them. Like they sell them the PIMS as a means to an end. The next step for them at least, is to sell them, like some of those are pharmaceutical companies, so they do a very good job at like also like owning the pharmacy aspect of any vet clinic. So it's all kind of like coming together, and they're all in bed together, if I may. So luckily we found a lot of, and I would say dozens if not hundreds of vets that are like spearheading we don't want to like fall into that trap. We don't want to be part of this whole call it like schema, but rather we want to build for the future. And those are the veterinarians that we're having a great time working with, and those are the vets that we have on our platform, and that some of our obviously like partners in the space are also working with. So we're seeing that trend, and I'm very optimistic about what the future holds.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we've seen this obviously in the traditional human healthcare industry with EMRs like Epic holding on to 70, 80% of the data that they have and not willing to maybe open it up, but they've started to be forced to open up for integrations. We saw this happen in the fintech space, as you mentioned, but then the plaids and everything else opened that up. We also saw this actually in the automobile space, where a lot of the data on people's cars was being held by some of the largest OEMs, ODMs, and manufacturers. But now with telematics and personal onboard computers, we're starting to see a lot of more of that data being coming back to the consumer. So I totally understand it. But it's interesting that you went through the back door instead of going through the front door, by going from the bottoms up instead of through the top down. And it sounds like it's starting to work for you guys.
Yeah, so I mean, the reality, Matt, is we're a bunch of young entrepreneurs for the most part. We don't quite have the background that some of our, I would say, other startups in our space have, in a sense where a lot of those are former veterinarians. They're sons and daughters of veterinarians. Like they come from, call it the pet space. We don't come from that space. We have obviously the passion. We have the willingness to learn. Some of our team members have gotten some certification around like vet techs and whatnot, but we don't come from that space. But even with that, we wanted to take it right on to the vets, right? I come from a space where we said, screw big bankers and screw Wall Street. We're going to build fintech. We're going to build like, fintech startups. My first kind of company that I, kind of was on the founding team of, it's called Paribus, was run by a couple of guys, Kareem Atiyeh, my brother, and his co-founder, Eric Glyman. I mean, today they're running a company called Ramp, which is one of I think the fastest like startup out of New York. I think the fastest one to get to unicorn status. Anyway, right? Like the reason why I'm mentioning this is, Paribus' premise at the time was all those retailers, whether it's Amazon, Bloomingdale's, Best Buy, have those policies called a price policy or price match guarantee that they offer to consumers, but then they make it very hard for people to come in and request that dollar back. Quick example of that, Matt. You bought it, I don't know, like Under Armour t-shirt for like $30. Within 7 days it drops to 25. Technically you're entitled to that $5 back. Paribus was this tool that automated the whole process for you. So I've always been in that kind of realm of justice as a service, or rather, how can I not have to deal with humans, in a sense where big retailers are super greedy, big bankers like are always thinking about the short term, like how can I show like my quarterly, how can I get this overdraft fee? I've always come from that school of thought, which is if I can avoid talking to the old school incumbents, I'm going to do that. Well, truth be told, in the pet space, it was harder than we thought. We were a little bit ahead of the curve. And I think that taking it heads on and fighting with them was not the right approach. And I'm the first one to call that a big F. So, luckily, we turned that failure into a W, and we understood that we have to bring, and there are a fraction, or I would say a growing audience within the veterinarian body that believes in what we're trying to do, and those are the people we want on our side, and that's what we ended up doing.
I love that. Justice as a service. You're like the Robin Hood of pet tech. That's fantastic.
I appreciate it. I like the valuation of Robin Hood. So yes.
Oh, you'll
you.
get there next. In the pet consumer space, a lot of the innovation has happened in the last several years, has been around the hardware and device segment of the market, along with the organic and natural food, pet food products, but not so much on the pet care. We've got the smart dog collars with GPS tracking and the Furbos for in-home pet cameras, but only recently telehealth has entered the market. Why do you think it took so long for that to happen? And how do you see it being adopted right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, one, why did it take so long? Just look back at the human space. Anything you see in the human space is going to happen in the pet space within 2, 3, 5 years, right? It took some time for people to start trusting telehealth in the human space. I think the pandemic just literally accelerated that timeline. It being 10 years, it became 2 years. And that's why I think, market adoption for telehealth within the pet space, or what I call televet, has been accelerated. So we saw that happening in the human space. It got democratized, people starting trusting it a lot more. There used to be a ton of regulations in the human space with HIPAA and whatnot that has been kind of like loosened up. And then ultimately that translated very nicely into the pet space. Now, the only area where the pet space is slightly more regulated than the human space is, believe it or not, in telehealth. And the reason for it, or at least the argument coming out of the union of veterinarians, or it's what's called VCPR, is the idea that vets can't talk, right? So it's very hard to diagnose a vet via telemedicine. Now, I will fight that claim any day of the week. I do believe that there's a lot that can be done via telemedicine within the pet space, and we're seeing and we're reaping the benefits from it. At least we're seeing it at Pawp, and I know some of our partners in the space are doing it. So it was, one, we had to wait for the human space, is the bottom line, right? We had to make sure that people started trusting televet via human space. Believe it or not, the advancement of technology, 4G, 5G, the fact that most people now have smartphones, the fact that, we can talk with such ease, that's also helped the space quite a bit. And going back to the basics, there was reticence at the highest level of the industry, which comes from veterinarians. At the end of the day, Matt, there is only one trusted advisor, capital T, capital A, in the space, and it's your veterinarian, right? That's may change over time. People starting to question what their vets are saying, and they started to understand that some of those vets are, for the most part, businessmen and women, and they're looking for their pockets. Not all of them, obviously. I don't want to put everybody in the same basket. So they're starting to get this other opinion. They're starting to believe and trust technology, and starting to trust what another opinion can do, what an independent startup can bring to the table, how a beautiful customer experience, from A to Z, from the minute you land on the website to the minute you have your first conversation, to you running through an emergency, which is part of what we offer at Pawp. All of those combined kind of got people excited and comfortable around the fact that pet care can be administered outside of your quote unquote go-to vet. Now, we don't replace your veterinarian. There's a lot of things we can do. You mentioned obviously some family members being in the surgery space. We can't do that. There's obviously some limits to what telehealth can do. But my fight and my mission is to get the pet space as technologically advanced as the human space is. And that's where I will go to bed at night and thinking, okay, we did a good job at Pawp. We fulfilled our mission. I don't want to be ahead of them. That's just us being too crazy, but I definitely want to be right behind them, if not on par with what we're seeing in the human health space.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely feeling the same sort of pushback that you were experiencing when we made our first investment at Ripple in on-call health in 2017, 2018, when telemedicine was still not seen to be able to help with, the 70% of the cases that are being dealt with today. I guess the big difference between telemedicine for humans and pets is the patient can talk in humans and the patient cannot talk when it comes to pets. Most vets on telemedicine services cannot diagnose or prescribe medications for pets that they haven't previously seen in person, but they are able to provide helpful advice, and that trust is where you want to start with it. But in the future, do you think there may be an opportunity for animal care companies to partner with veterinary telemedicine services like Pawp to close the gap between remote care and prescriptions, similar to the way that maybe Amazon is trying to do that for humans with their Amazon Care service?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I may comment on a small thing you alluded to, which is the VCPR regulations around like prescribing medication via telemedicine. The reality, and this is obviously a subject that's very close to my heart and something I've been following for a while. Like, when we raised our last round, part of like what we wanted to do, and we're still very well focused on, is to be heads on and to be the first to do it when it's allowed for us to do it. Now, quick update on what's happening. So federally, that regulation, or I would say those kind of like no-goes, have been lifted because of COVID. So right around March, or I think April of last year, from a federal perspective, VCPR has been loosened. The idea that you must have had a previous relationship between a vet and a dog or a cat has been loosened federally. Now they or at least they left it up to the states to decide whether they want to allow that or not. And that's changing by the day. There are some states that have loosened it up. Oklahoma is one of them. Some states where, those are ongoing, call it legal battles between some, call it, forward-looking veterinarians, obviously the ones I like, versus the ones that want to keep it that way and want to keep it the way it is, because I'm sure you know that, Matt, a lot of the money that they make is through prescriptions at home or within the clinic itself, right? So that's the first part of the question. The second part is, one thing I've always said is the winner, or to win in pet care, you do have to understand that you can do it all, but you must do it all. And that's kind of the dilemma that we go through every day at Pawp. And let me explain myself. I don't want to be, and I don't think we'll ever open a vet clinic ourselves, like a physical vet clinic. But for us to offer a 360, and I would say like a full encompassing like pet care coverage end to end, from the day your puppy's born to the day, hate to say it, your puppy leaves us or your dog or cat leaves us, we must partner with, like you said, physical vet clinics. I've always, been very excited about what we're seeing in the advancements we're seeing in lab or at home lab tests within the pet space. Pretty much what we're seeing in the human space, right? DNA test is becoming more and more of a thing that's exciting. I'm sure we saw, some, call it, other company in the pet space that raised a big round that I'm very excited about. Like, I want to see how far they can go. So it's the idea that for you to win in pet care, you must understand you need to partner with those companies. And we are the first ones to say it. We can't build it on our own. Obviously, like, we have the platform. I believe that the product and the audience that we're bringing together is above and beyond what we're seeing from our competitors. But I also do understand that we cannot have an expertise in everything. And we will be the first ones at Pawp to raise our hands and say, hey, let's partner with this DNA test company. Let's partner with this hardware, call it Fi or, Whistle or one of those like, smart collars. I'm never going to develop a collar. That's not our area of expertise. So if there are ways we can partner with them and open up some of our capabilities with their capabilities, I do believe that's going to be for the betterment of pet parents overall. And this is the mission that we have.
That makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Don't be a Swiss Army knife, but just be the one that brings everyone together under the same brand or platform is going to help you compete against some of these larger incumbents as well. My wife likes to say, by the way, it's crossing the rainbow bridge. It's not when they leave us. So just make sure when everyone talks, it's the rainbow bridge is where they go after they leave us here on Earth.
Good one. I appreciate it.
But, in terms of the veterinary pharmacy space, you just talked about this in terms of relation to remote care. Given that most animal pharmacies are compounding pharmacies, meaning that they can specifically mix medication into different formats, meaning they mostly rely on mail order or just your local vet. But I have heard that retail pharmacies like Walgreens and Walmart are expanding into on-site pet clinics. Are you worried that these retailers could also expand their existing telemedicine services to cover pet care down the road? And if so, how would you defend against this?
Yeah, not at all is the short answer. And I'll say it a million times. Like, I'm much more worried about, a startup that raised couple of $1 million than one of those incumbents, even though they probably have $2 with like 3 or 4 zeros next to it. Point being, 2 million with 3 and 4 zeros. My point being, televet is very tricky. It's all about the experience. It's all about the quality of the camera. It's all about the lighting. It's all about a obsession that we all have about the experience that we're offering our pet parents. And not to quote the investor themselves, but one of the investors that came in at the A, and I will never forget that sentence. He spoke to us, tried the service overnight, was very happy with the service, and ultimately emailed us something along the lines of, "I've never seen experience like that with televet, not only televet but telehealth. I wouldn't believe that you guys like were able to put this in such a short period of time." It's all about the experience. It's all about your obsession around like the button, like how quickly you can get a vet on the line, how slowly but surely you're scaling the platform. How can you make every single consult feel like it's not a in-person better than an in-person? Because a lot of what we do and what we brag about is the aftercare, right? So like you come to us, your vet recommends a bunch of things. Your vet recommends services. There are notes and whatnot. All of this lives in our dashboard. All of this lives now in your profile. All of this is kind of like something you can come back to, something you don't see in vet clinics today, right? So it's an industry where you like the care that you're getting because you're very, more often than not, you like the vet that you're working with. But if we can replicate that kind of relationship and add to it all of what technology allows us to do in terms of having all the products that we're recommending, some sorts of dashboard, making sure that once you talk to a vet, on the second or third visit, they know what they're talking about. They know who they're dealing with. They make you feel, because it's the truth, that they've seen you before. All of that, and the accessibility and the affordability of what we're able to offer, like all of those combined, has been, or at least I do believe we're doing something good for the space. I mean, let that sink for a minute, Matt. But we are charging people, or we're asking people to pay us $19 a month to have unlimited access to talk, text, and video chat with a vet at all times. I mean, that's something that's kind of unbeatable, right? Like today, you go to a vet clinic, you're at least looking at $150. That is if nothing has been administered. That is if they didn't oversell you on doing lab tests and whatnot. So we are building a lot of those relationships. People are starting to trust us. They come to us for recommendations on products, services. We have this tagline, which is no such thing as a stupid question, right? And a lot of people come to us with something I would label as, not a question you would probably like get in a car and go and ask your vet down the street, or maybe like, a bit farther than that. Point being, we're the first line of defense. We're providing people with peace of mind. We're providing them with quality pet care at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, it sounds like you're leading with product and customer experience, and that's going to be a huge, game changer for you versus some of your competitors. When we had to go through the experience with our puppy Jones, Trupanion was our insurance provider, and I have to say they were incredible at their customer service. They were right on top of all of the different bills we had. I mean, it got up to probably tens of thousands after, the leg breaking and orthopedic and surgery and all that. It was quite expensive. But to know somebody was there supporting us, who understood what we were going through, was a lot better than just dealing with like a teleoperator or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Trupanion, obviously, like, I don't want to badmouth anybody in this space, but Trupanion is obviously one of the leaders. They're doing a great job at aligning themselves with some of those, like, vet clinics that we mentioned earlier. I like what they're doing. But I'll say this, there's still a lack of understanding as to what is it that people want, right? And, Matt, and I'll say it in very blunt terms, like you are, call it like, you wouldn't represent what I would call the rest of America, in a sense where you may be able to afford $150 premium. But what they are unable to understand, that is like, the vast majority of those pet insurers or pet brands in general, is that people can't afford $100 a month on premiums. And it is true that the cost of pet care is going up. So instead of like, kind of passing that cost to pet parents, try to understand how can you play a role in reducing the cost of pet care, even if you're an insurance company. And I think the answer is pretty clear, like do telehealth and do it well, and deflect some of those unnecessary vet visits, deflect some of those, like, I have an emergency, but actually you don't, because most parents do think that their dog's going through emergency when they're not, right? So if you can do that and bridge the gap between, you're not just only an insurance company, and we never call ourselves an insurance company, we're a pet care company, and we have two main products today, and we're expanding, along other verticals for sure. But my point being, like, I do believe that the next winner within, if you want to call it pet insurance, is a company that does understand that it's not just about paying the bills and doing it well and offering a stellar customer experience, because I think that's like has to be there. Otherwise, you can't even qualify, you can't even compete. It's about understanding how can I reduce those costs, the cost of pet care for pet parents, and have more of a 1 year view into the space, like have more of a 5 or 10 year view, like what is the space going to look like in 5 to 10 years, and that's when you'll win.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely not for everyone. It's not a cheap service to have pet insurance, but it's definitely something that comes in handy. But for you, let's talk about some of the telehealth providers that the market is currently being serviced by, in addition to Pawp. Like Small Door or Televet or Pet Desk and the others that are out there in the market. What does it look like in the way that Pawp is offering your service differently there versus the competitors? And I've read that you offer this $3,000 emergency plan, which seems to be a game changer for you guys. Can you tell us how it works and how you guys are differentiating yourself?
Absolutely. And I'll start with the basic differences, and then I'll kind of tell you a little bit about the vision and how I think from a very high level and philosophical, like, we do have lots of differences with some of the players you mentioned in this space. Let's take the example of Small Door, right? Like I'm a client, not of Small Door, but of a company called Milo, which I would say like falls in the same realm. And I'll put it in very simple terms. Those are for people who can afford it. They're physical clinics. They are forward-looking, very, very high-tech physical clinics. And I'll say it a million times, I'm a client. I don't know if I think this is going to be what's going to really make a splash in the pet space, right? So like these folks started with opening up very high-tech, amazing, beautiful. Like I've never thought I would get excited about going to a vet clinic as much as I love going to Milo. And when I used to be in Manhattan, I used to go to a place called Bond Vet as well. Same idea, forward looking. There's a company called Modern Animal in LA as well, all kind of like similar, whereby they do have this clinic, but they do bank on the fact that they're gonna, extract like more than a few $1,000s a year for their customers. So they have a limited number of people, but they extract a lot of money from those people, and that's kind of like their business model. Now they started with the clinic, and now they're going to televet and understanding like how to use this as a supplement to what their real and core business is. We're thinking very differently, right? We believe that, and I'll say it, and actually you have to quote me on it, but I don't think I will ever open a physical clinic. I just don't think this is where the business is headed. But more importantly, we like the fact that we do things digitally. We like the fact that we can service multiple people at once. We believe that the real business is addressing the 98% of self-insured individuals in the country. I'm sure you know that only 2% of pets are insured in this country, and nobody's kind of like understood why. And I think we have part of the answer, which is affordability. You cannot expect someone to pay $100 and tell them that, yeah, it will protect you against the $10,000, cancer treatment. Yes, it will, but they can't pay the 100 to start with. Our approach is, let's charge people $19. Let's not cover them for everything and, cancers and crazy things that may obviously happen with your pet. But let's focus on that 2 a.m. My dog inhaled, or I don't know, ingested. I'll give you a real example. Ingested a nog of cannabis the other day. We had that. And you have to rush to the vet clinic. And then you show up at the vet clinic and the vet says, hey, it's going to be at least a $2,000 like kind of whatever, like surgery or intervention. And not only that, you do have to provide me with that $1,000 right now. That's the $1,000 deposit. Well, most Americans, and this is the space I come from, don't have $1,000 just like laying around in their pocket. And this is where we come in handy. And this is where people have had tremendous experiences with Pawp, whereby We get in touch with the vet clinic. We will provide that $1,000 deposit. We will make sure your dog or cat gets taken care of, and we will ultimately pay the full $2,000, no questions asked. So those are our users. Those are the people that running through an emergency, they don't have $2,000. At best, their option was to get a 30% high APR loan that's going to crush them financially, pretty similar to what we see in the human space, and or have to put their dog down, something notoriously known as financial euthanasia in the space. So this is what we're addressing. We're not quite, and with all due respect to you, Matt, we're not addressing people who can afford $100 premium. But we are understanding that most of America cannot afford that, but most of America needs some level of safety net. And this is what our $3,000 emergency fund does. So just to summarize what we do today, Matt, $19 a month, you get unlimited talk, text, video chat with a vet, no questions asked, no appointment needed. We're the only ones to do that in the space. But more importantly, as part of that $19, which is a huge differentiator, we offer a $3,000 emergency fund that you can use for one of your up to 6 pets in your household. We do very well with people who have more than one pet. And it can only be used once. No deductible, no copay, no pre-existing condition. We cover it all, right? And that's kind of what we do at Pawp.
First off, it does sound like your justice as a service mission is still conversed over into Pawp, the Robin Hood, as you will. But just so I understand, the $3,000 payment fund, that basically gets amortized over a period of years and gets paid back. Is there an interest rate charge on that? How does it work to get the money back?
Absolutely not. It's super simple. And I think this is also something the space needs. Make it simple. Let people understand. I'm guaranteed. Tell me what the policy you signed up for, Matt. I'm sure I can ask you 2 or 3 questions you won't be able to answer because it's probably a multi-page policy. People have so much to deal with I would say, and I don't want to throw a jab at the health space, but I will, with all of the intricacies and the complications around your own health insurance and how that works. And now you're introducing yet another complicated policy. You're not going to win. So our policy is super simple. You sign up, you have to stay with us for at least 14 days, which is what we call our grace period. And starting that point on, God forbid, and the beauty is you don't want to deal with it as a pet parent. We don't want to deal with it as a business. It's not good for our bottom line. But God forbid, your dog or cat runs through an emergency. Some of the most common ones are, ingesting a foreign object, liver failure, some crazy rashes sometimes, bleeding because of there's a lot of reasons. But let's say this happens. You rush to the vet clinic. You have to talk to us. You get in touch with us within a few seconds. We look at your pet. It's very clear to our vets that this is an emergency. They will unlock your funds. And what that means is you can rush to any vet clinic, any ER, no restrictions on that. Within 4 hours is kind of the only, because obviously, we got to make sure your dog or your cat's taken care of. You have to go there, you show up, and at that time, we get in touch, or we would have gone in touch with the vet clinic you're at, and essentially told them that, hey, we will pay for that care. You tell us how much it is, whether, it's via credit card. I don't want to give up a lot of our secrets because I do think that some of our edges in how we do those things. But the idea is we will pay the $3,000. Whether you've been with us for 15 days or 360 days, you're entitled to the full $3,000. Whether you use $500 or $2,900 out of the $3,000, same to us. You've used it. You've used your fund. And it's an emergency fund. It really is in the event of an emergency.
The $3,000 that you pay for the service, I assume you're adding that payment of the $3,000 back. It's not like you just get the $3,000.
There's no payback.
Oh, wow.
It's something you are entitled to as part of Pawp.
Oh, my.
Yeah. It's literally something you're entitled to. You don't have to pay it back. You pay your $19. God forbid something happens, we will pay $3,000. Now you're gonna ask me how do you guys make money? But that's a question outside of our discussion here live.
Okay.
but I can walk you through it.
Okay, got it. That's good. I didn't know that. That's awesome. Really, really nice to hear that. Actually, thank you for clarifying it. Let's talk about the impact of COVID. On pet demand specifically, given the stay-at-home orders. I felt like everywhere I went around with my dog, I was seeing a new puppy everywhere on the block. Everyone was calling them COVID puppies. And according to Pet Health, there was huge pet adoption rates spiked all across the U.S., with animal adoption and fostering rates growing over 100% year over year. But how has your business been affected by the pandemic? And do you expect it to continue post-pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So How did it get affected? Obviously, the numbers don't lie, right? Like the volume of new puppies is obviously growing. We happen to be a company that attracts a lot of new pet parents just by virtue of having a very cheap membership, $19, that encompasses not just an insurance policy or however you want to call it, an emergency fund, but also unlimited access. As a new pet parent, you have tons of questions. If you go on pawp.com, we have a full-on dedicated product for new pet parents. We walk you and we put you in touch with a nutritionist, behaviorist, trainer. So it's the idea that we do understand that there's a lot of those and a lot of them around. And luckily for us, I would not to give up a lot of our numbers, but a big portion of our members are those puppies or new pet parents, depending on how you look at it and who your client is or your customer is. So that's been affected, right? There's a lot of them. That's one. Two, vet clinics were closed for a long period of time, right? And there's still some of them. I mean, I think it's most of them reopened. Some of them, unfortunately, went out of business, or like some people kind of like stuck with us for the longest. But I'll say it a million times, man. Like, we do replace vets for certain people who live in very remote areas, but we cannot administer vaccines. We cannot perform surgery, right? So at the end of the day, we are a supplement or complement to your vet clinics, but we are here when your vet clinic is closed, and we can obviously provide you with professional advice from our professional pet care pros or experts or individuals, right? So that's also a thing. Last but not least, I'm going to go back to the same thing I've been hammering down, is people starting to trust telehealth in the human space because of COVID, because it's honestly, they had no choice. They had to see someone. So that's also helped the pet space tremendously, in a sense where people starting to trust televet because of the pandemic. Now, the only downside in all of this is, and you alluded to it, is people just adopting at such a fast rate and not thinking it through, right? Like, they adopt a pet because their neighbor did that, because their significant other was pushing them to do so, because peer pressure, because they felt lonely and whatnot. But then now it's like, the bell rang, you have to go back to the office. Like, what do you do? So we've been at the forefront alongside other companies in explaining and telling people that pets are important. You can't just get a pet and then surrender the pet, or throw it back to fosters and shelters and you name it. Now, we've seen some of that. I think it's been corrected in the past few months. I do think we're part of the solution alongside other companies in terms of offering that kind of help and explaining to them how to take care of a pet and making it easier and cheaper for them to do that. We have a lot of content around that. If you go to pawp.com/blog, we get hundreds of thousands of pet parents who visit our blog and get some of that, get educated around what to do in those specific cases. So it is very important that we don't see surrender, and we don't want that surrender rate to go up for us and for the rest of the space. But I've been in touch with shelters, and for the most part, they've been very busy. They don't have pets, and that's always good news, right? Like, shelters are just empty, which is always a good news. And if you can adopt, definitely adopt. I will say this, like, that's kind of like one of the messages I want to get across. But we got to be careful, and we got to see it. If the Delta variant turns out to be another big one, I hate to say it, it's good for business. It's terrible for my mental health. I'm gonna go nuts, Matt. My co-founder keeps telling me, but it's good for business. To which I'm like, we're doing just fine. We're doing very well, actually. But I need to go out. I need to take my wife on a dinner date. Like, we can't go back again and again and again to those lockdowns. But again, I will follow whatever the government decides and whatever the scientists and experts say. But I'm just crossing my fingers that we don't go into a phase 2 of a lockdown. But that's kind of my answer to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are too as well in Canada. But I think, with what you were saying in terms of how you've made it easier for a lot of new pet parents to adjust to this new life of theirs, there were these concerns that all of these pets that were either being adopted, fostered, or even purchased would go back into the sort of supply, and it would cause a new kind of pandemic of oversupply of pets. And I think your solution, along with the others in the space, are making a lot easier to manage pet care, deal with a lot of the adjustments to the new life they have. because it is a big adjustment for people who are typically not used to having a dependent like a pet rely on them all the time. So I do agree with you. I don't think the slippage we're going to see in terms of the spiking in demand is going to fall right back to where it started from pre-pandemic, or at least I hope that's the case. And it sounds like your team is helping make that adjustment to people's new lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say it, Matt, it takes an army, and it's not just us, right? It's a lot of the other players in the space that are playing a huge role in that. And I think that it's not, I'll repeat one of our taglines, which is quality pet care at a fraction of the cost. So it's providing that care, it's giving people access to it, and in some way, shape, or form, either helping them pay for it or deflecting a lot of the unnecessary costs, which would be them going to doing 6 vet visits in a month.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you've got some recent funding from new investors who believe in that team that you've built around you. You recently closed a Series A round of 13 million with Lux Capital and Hoff Capital. What are your growth plans with that capital, and what was that fundraising process like for you?
Absolutely. So fundraising was an interesting one. Luckily we get to a fundraising meeting, and very often is, I have a dog, I have a cat, let's talk, right? So it's always easier to break the ice when you're talking to investors. There was a lot of, it was an uphill battle, maybe not on this round, but the previous rounds, just because there was a lot of misunderstanding as to what, at least from an investor's perspective, not all of them, again, I don't want to put everybody in the same basket, but they read that the space is growing, but they don't understand where to play, and they don't understand where the real opportunity is, right? Like they read that the pet space is 30 billion in food, so they're investing in food companies, but honestly, it's a very, very, very tough market. It's been great that I would say investors started to understand the space more recently. There's been a lot of like ink in the press around the pet space and some of the funding that we've been seeing. I do think, again, like if others win, we're gonna win in our space. So we're all a part of that. Call it like, some people call it VetTech, some people call it PetTech, whatever you want to call it. But it does help that there's more money flowing into the space. Lux Capital is one of those sophisticated investors. Like if you look at some of the investments they've made, it's pretty crazy. And up until today, you look at their portfolio companies they invest in very grand visions, like hard tech, moonshots is what some people call them, in a sense where they do want to change the world and they mean it, and they put their money where their mouth is. And when I jumped on a call with them, my first reaction was like, hey, what their tagline is, we invest in between, like, call it sci-fi and sci-fact. We want to make whatever, like virtual, like something real. To which I said, like, we do have a 5-year plan to send a dog to the moon, but for now we're doing some very simple things. And I meant it. But hey, like, they do think that this could become a massive company. Pet care is huge and it's growing by the day. Historically, there hasn't been a lot of, I would say, smart minds working on pet care. And I think that's changed in the past 2 to 3 years, since I would say even before we entered it. Like, we're seeing a lot of like excitement, a lot of like very, very smart individuals putting their minds and heads and times and resources into the pet space. And we're also seeing some of the better investors obviously investing in that space as well, all of which is playing a huge role. So Lux is great. We love them. They've been great to us. They've provided us with a lot of like support. But I do want to give the shout out to a lot of other operators that have backed us from the day we started. That is, Zach Reitano, who's the founder of Row. That is Cyrus Masumi, founder of ZocDog. There is, obviously Kareem and Eric over at Ramp. There's Matteo Franceschetti over at 8 Sleep. So I'm really trying to align myself and having Pawp put Pawp on the map. Like, we are part of that revolution around like improving health, improving healthcare, and pets are just a piece of it, right? Like, the same way I would say a mental health company is participating in getting you better mentally. I do think we're playing our part of the role and our part of this game, which is we're all part of that big trend towards like health care in general. Very exciting times for companies in the pet space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Lux Capital, incredible lead investor who definitely has a bend towards deep tech and hard tech. But you said you're going to put a dog on the moon, so I'm waiting to see that. But for now, you've got some other problems to solve, and an amazing group of angel operator investors that it looks like are on the cap table. So congratulations on the Series A round, and can't wait to see what's next. Now, before we wrap things up, we always like to ask our guests for their fast favorites, where I list off 5 categories and you list your favorite of each. So let's start off first with your favorite podcast.
I love the Pump podcast. I mean, I'm not a huge crypto guy, but I just like Pump. He's funny. He makes me laugh. He has like super hot takes. And I love this kind of like boisterous like personality. So that would be it.
Definitely super boisterous and super entertaining at the same time. Favorite newsletter and blog?
Morning Brew. No doubt in my mind. It makes me, honestly, I read it every morning. I love Austin, who runs it. Great friend, investor of Pawp as well. Makes me smarter every day.
That's great. Favorite tech gadget?
I'm gonna go with the Whoop. I've been liking my Whoop lately. We share some of the partners we work with that work with Will. Believe it or not, Will, the founder, was on the squash team. He was the captain of the squash team back when I was in school. So me and Will go way back. But completely bias aside, I think what they've done, it took them some time, but they've done and have built a hardware meets software that's just like making so much noise, and we've been seeing that in the Olympics. So it goes to Whoop.
That's awesome. I mean, hardware is hard, and they've done it in a very difficult space. What was the one thing you saw change in your habits or your health habits?
My sleep is better. I drink way less because, no joke, one sip of whiskey and the next day my recovery goes down to red, and I don't want to do that.
Wow, that's a good one. Okay, favorite new trend?
People drinking less alcohol. I'm not joking on this one. I've definitely seen it. I don't know if it's my friends, it's my small social circle, whatnot, but I think people are, giving it up in exchange for other things. I know coffee is on the rise. I don't think that it's this or that. I think it's just like both of them like need to go down. As long as it's not people giving it up for nicotine, I'm very happy.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that one. And last but not least, favorite book?
It's a very boring one, but it's Crossing the Chasm. I know it's one that I studied in college, in school. It's the idea that, yes, you may do well with the early adopters. You're going to do very well with people who are all for like trying new things, but you're going to get to a point where, and we've seen it firsthand at Pawp, which is you're going to get to a point with how do you make sure that you go mass market? How do you make sure that you move and you cross that chasm is what they call it, but call it a bridge, and you go from the early adopters to everyone. And the faster you do this, the faster or the faster you understand how to go from A to B, the more likely your company is to succeed. And if you spend way too much time in that chasm, you're dead.
Absolutely.
So I love this book.
It's still a great book, and it's still relevant to today and for a lot of startups out there going through some of the growing pains that we all go through every single day. So thanks for joining us in the tank today, Marc, to discuss the future of pet tech with Marc Atiyeh at Pawp.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode or to check out previous episodes. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating, as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter at Matty B. Cohen or at Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,